of you who are joining us for the first time today, Third Path Institute is a national nonprofit celebrating our 20th anniversary. And long before others discovered the importance of including men in the work-life integration discussion, or the science of pushing back at overwhelm so we can all work smarter, we were showing people how to do work, family, and leadership differently. Did you know over 71,000 people checked out our free resources last year, like the live and recorded versions of our Thursday webinars? We're glad you're here today. And as you will quickly discover, today's webinar truly celebrates all that we have learned in the last 20 years. So before we get started, I wanted to talk a little about how today's webinar is about developing resilience. And what you'll also hear is that in this discussion, we're talking about how this has become a little bit more difficult in today's pandemic, especially for parents who are balancing work and school and family. On our last month's webinar, we talked a little bit about what you can do both around changes at work and changes at home to better manage things in the pandemic. But we know it's hard. In fact, some of you today might still be in that fear zone. You're facing a job loss or already experienced a job loss. You just don't know what's going to happen next week or next month. And so we really recognize as you're listening in today that all of us are doing the best we can and trying to figure out solutions that make sense. But what I think you'll find out from the two experts joining us today, there's a lot of sage advice around how we can actually make some meaning from today's pandemic and make some choices around maybe what life could look like in a better way afterwards. We have Christine Carter joining us. I love her. She's written such great books. Each one has been terrific to read. We've had her on our webinars more than once. You're going to be really glad to hear the expert advice she has to share with us. I also have a dear friend, Patrick Patterson, joining us. He's been out there fighting the good fight with us around fathers and families. It is a delight to have Patrick join us, and you'll see he's been putting these ideas into practice in his own life and with all the fathers that he works with. And next month will actually be the last of our live webinars for this season. All year long, we've been celebrating our 20th anniversary. It's been a really exciting year. And if you missed one of our webinars, you can find all of the previous webinars on our website or YouTube, iTunes, or SoundCloud. And again, just as a reminder, today we're going to be talking about some who have the luxury of being able to work from home, some who have the flexibility to be able to combine school and work and family. And that's not something all of us have. So let's remember this in this beautiful pandemic prayer today. What was interesting when I got prepared for today's webinar was how Christine makes such an important case about how technology is really a double-edged sword. And if you think about it, today we are so lucky to have the technology we have because for many of us that means we can keep on working. We can do distance learning at school with our kids. We can video chat with friends and family. We can almost order anything online. But if you picked up Christine's newest book, you'd also see some scary statistics, really scary statistics, about how there's been an increase in depression, anxiety, and thoughts of suicide in Gen Z. And it's possible technology, and in particular being online a lot and social media, has contributed to this. It's a real eye-opener to read these statistics. And we aren't going to talk a lot about that today, but I am going to be talking some about how this is the double-edged sword of technology. We want to have technology in our lives. That's the future we see, but we also know it can really cause problems. And so I'll have Christine talk in a second about some of the double-edged sword of technology. But I wanted to, before we go there, in particular talk about some of what she talks about around how more screen times means more alone time, more social media can mean there's this kind of increase in insecurity and comparison that could make it very difficult for us. And I would even argue some of what happens in social media doesn't really show the grit of life, because suddenly you have someone who seems to be instantly famous, when really that's not what happens in most of our lives. So I'm going to have Christine talk about technology for a little bit, and then we're going to go on and talk more about the focus of today's call around how we can develop some resiliency in our families, even in COVID-19. One big message today, and I'm sure Christine will join me on this message, is that it's not just about our kids. It's about what we're modeling to our kids as well. So Christine, tell us a little bit about what you learned around technology and adolescence today, and then we're going to really switch to a focus on what you learned about the importance of connection, rest, and focus. What would you like to add, Christine?
Well, I sure think that this whole situation has been pretty eye-opening. I mean, I think what we've known for a long time is that all these new technologies are really powerful, and when they are misused, they can be harmful, right? So a lot of the struggle that we're seeing, not just in Gen Z, I agree, but across the board, across generations, is around how to use new media, for example, social media, in a way that makes us feel good rather than makes us feel less than. And it's definitely possible. How can we use technology to promote connection, and connection in a way that it feels real, right? Like it feels deep, rather than what we're seeing with kids is that they're just alone in their rooms on their screens a lot. Not all of them, of course, but what we know is that the more time alone that they spend, rather than before this pandemic hanging out in person with their friends, the more worrying the outcomes tend to be. So there's a lot of we have a lot of power in all of this. We lose our power when our use of technology becomes compulsive, and when it feels addictive, when we don't feel like we have control over our technology use anymore. And for our kids, it's really important, parents, of course, every hour of every day since this started, I've gotten questions about like, how much screen time is too much screen time, right? Now they're in school, their school is in screen time, and it counts as screen time. And, it's just possible for us all to be online all the time, or for a lot of us anyway. And so I really want parents to sort of cross that question off their list of things to worry about right now. Instead, turn your attention to are y'all getting enough sleep, right? Do you have a regular sleep schedule? If technology is interrupting sleep, then that's too much screen time, right? So looking at the really big things. Can they come to have dinner with your family and leave their phone behind, without anxiety about it? Can they do their schoolwork without being distracted by social media? Can they focus, right? Can they get something done there? And are they getting enough sleep? So if they're meeting the sort of big categories of well-being, then I just don't think policing screen time to the minute right now is going to be very effective.
Amen. I love every point you just made. And what's so fun is we're going to kind of keep on circling back to so many of them, the importance of rest, the importance of focus, the importance of connection. And so that was the fun part when I kind of rethought, how do we talk about your important book during the middle of a pandemic? I decided to really focus on those three magical concepts: connection, rest, and focus, something every family can make happen, no matter your background. These are things you can make happen. And what I love about your book, and all of your books is that really this has been a theme that you've been looking at forever in your entire career, starting with, each of your books you've added to these ideas about how connection, rest, and focus are really at the root of wellness for ourselves, our children, our adolescents. And so it's been fun to see you kind of bring those themes back into these important different perspectives. In fact, for the people who are listening in today, I have a free book to give away from her latest, The New Adolescence. So we will be able to look at who was able to attend today. We'll be in touch with you, and you'll be able to participate in our raffle. Do you feel like there's been this theme about, I'm sure you do, some of these themes that you've seen in each of your books that you want to speak about before we talk a little bit about Patrick?
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely true. I write about what I see my own family struggling with and the people around me. And, I've now been writing about this for 15 years. So it's all a continuation, right? The New
Yeah,
Adolescence is like
yeah,
raising happiness plus all the things I learned in 10 years, right?
yeah,
And the
yeah,
adolescent piece. And the sweet spot is much more about my own journey away from overwork. And of course, these three things, connection, rest, and focus, are really, really essential. And when any one of those core needs is thwarted, we don't feel well, right? Like it's hard to
yeah,
it's hard to thrive if we are lacking in connection or rest, or the surprising one for I think a lot of people, but we're really feeling it now because of all the Zoom work, the people who are working from home anyway,
yeah,
is focus, right? Like I
yeah,
think a lot of people are not able to focus in the way that they might have been, or the way that they're expecting to right now. And so we can talk about that, but it's exhausting,
yeah,
and it contributes to feelings of ill-being.
yeah. Well, and how they're all interconnected because, if I just take yesterday as an example, I could tell I needed a rest, that my focus wasn't great. Well, how did I get that? I went for a bike ride. I hung out at dinner with my family. It's like all of these things can either feed each other in a really positive way, or they can really erode each other in a negative way. And of course, I knew intuitively that Patrick was someone who was thinking about these issues. And then I heard he had written a book with his daughter called Unplugged. So clearly, Patrick, connection, rest, focus, these are things you've been thinking about in your own life, probably with the work you've been doing with fathers. So far, any thoughts that you want to share about how you're been applying these ideas in your own life or family?
Yeah, well, I just want to just say thank you again for the chance to be on. And Christine, you were singing my song as you were talking. So it's just really important, I think, for me as a father with two girls and a wife. It's so easy to slip into this work mode, which a lot of people were before the pandemic. And our decision to do a couple things a little while ago was really because of my work with dads. I've been doing work with fathers for probably 20 years. And one of the things that I found, a lot of fathers, they do what they like to do, and they don't do what they don't know what not to do. And so one of the things that I've just noticed is that a lot of fathers, particularly when it comes to technology, to Christine's point, I've seen parents at a restaurant, you guys have as well, just kind of give a kid a device and they enjoy dinner while the kid is glued to that screen.
Yeah.
So the impetus behind the children's books for us was really to give them a kind of a tool to spend time. They can read it, it's all picture books, but also give a message. In our second book, which we just released, Unplugged, before the pandemic, and I'm not I don't have a crystal ball, but we, in my work, I just see a lot of dads and families even, including my own. My oldest daughter is a ninth grader, and she was the only kid with no cell phone, Dad. I'm the only kid with no cell phone. And we held off for a while because I wanted to keep her small. But as she got it, it was so obvious, to Christine's point, that it could have become really addictive really quickly. So
yes.
We just tried to kind of not only say, but also practice what we think is important when it comes to spending time with your family.
Yeah, yeah. And what I love, just if we just even look at that picture of Unplugged, it's really what we're modeling as parents too, And so, if we're coming to dinner and we're we're constantly checking our phones. If we're, not doing a great job of getting rest at night, if we're haven't really explored how to be focused. I was talking to my kids about this one in particular. I've got a 29-year-old and a 23-year-old, and and you're right, Christine. It is harder to do focus right now with the pandemic, but there are ways we can train ourselves to be more focused. And again, we're going to come to each of these further in the webinar. So Patrick, I feel like what you're doing is you're saying this is for my kids, but this is for me too. Any other thoughts before I go on to the next slide? None required, Patrick. Any other thoughts?
No, I just think the example is really important. Our first few weeks with our daughter on the phone, it was kind of hard to say to her, put your phone down, when she could say, hey, what about you guys?
Yeah.
So it's definitely been a mirror, self-check, so to speak. That's been really good, but we'll get into it a little bit later.
Good, yeah. So that's what I'm hoping, is that we're going to talk a little bit about how this is how we can do things differently right now in COVID-19. But I hope the big takeaway from today's webinar is that these are ideas that many third parents have been practicing for way before COVID-19, and I hope you will practice way beyond COVID-19. So I've been using this, image. It's the one we all know so well. The glass is half full or half empty. So trying to have rest in COVID-19. I'm going to kind of give some background, some thoughts about this, and then we have a slide that talks about some of the things that Christine recommends as ways we can think about rest. So we'll get a little input from Christine and then Patrick on each of these concepts: rest, focus, and connection. So obviously rest is, can be pretty hard right now. I feel like our family's kind of evolved past the worst of it. We had this call 7 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, I feel like the stress of the change was so radical and hard. It was pretty hard. But, there are many parents who are still burning the candle at both ends, trying to figure out how to do work, family, and school. And they've lost a lot of support in that process. I'm actually quite worried about parents and how they can make this a sustainable solution when we're not talking about school starting up until September, and some scary people talking about it even later. This is a really hard time, and I do hope that you're thinking about a sustainable solution if you're a family listening in today. But what I also have heard, it's been really interesting for families who've gotten smart about how to approach things. They're seeing some silver linings. They're eating more dinners together. No one's rushing out the door in the morning. They have more hangout time. And so as much as I know that there are some families truly struggling and there needs to be something that helps them make it sustainable, there's been some gifts for families who've figured out, we were overscheduled. We were doing too much. We don't want to go back to that. We want to do things differently. And so I'm going to get Christine to talk about this with me a little bit. I put a couple of things up here that I thought were really important around how we can promote more rest, how we can model this ourselves. But before we go over this list, Christine, is there anything that you want to say first?
I think we need actually more rest during this whole pandemic. And I think that I'm seeing a lot of people in myself as well. I think we're kind of, a lot of us are sort of systematically underestimating the emotional toll that this is taking on us, right? It's like the things that are exhausting. I came out of the gates really hot, like thinking this is going to be fine. I'm going to get all my kids. I have 4 teenagers and 3 of them were away at school. And so having them all home, I was all half full. And I thought that I was just I got pulled off the road. So I wasn't traveling, and so I'm like, okay, I'm going to read these 200 books, and you know what I mean? Like I really
Yep.
had high hopes, and the reality has not. The, of course, that's not at all what happened. And part of what was unanticipated for me was how exhausting it is to like that there's just sort of like waves of bad news, right? Like the
Yes.
uncertainty then
Yep.
becomes more uncertain, becomes more uncertain. And it's just not the way that we human beings um, do well, right? Like
Yes.
we like to have
Yes.
control. A sense of control
Yeah.
is really important to our
Yeah.
overall well-being, and we just don't have that right now. And when in the absence of control, we really like to have information, and
Yes.
we really look to leaders for guidance. And we're just not getting a lot of that
Yes.
right now. We don't have a lot of good information about this virus. We don't have sort of a cohesive, consistent leadership that is, you know, like we're just all over the place, or in our neighborhood, in our state, in the nation, in you know the world. So that's the piece of it. It's just exhausting to be coping with so much uncertainty
Yes.
and the emotions that come with loss, right? Like there's a lot of grief. Last
Yes.
night, one of my kids found out, and it wasn't a huge surprise, but she still had the sliver of optimism. This was going to be the first year she was going to be a camp counselor. So at the camp where she was a camper for 9 years, a summer sleepaway summer camp, and so this was like just such a big deal to her to like
Yes.
be hired as a counselor, and she was the head backpacking person. There were just like so many things about it that she was really looking forward to, and also that sort of marked a real rite of passage for
Yes.
her, from a real transition from kid slash camper to adult count slash counselor, you know. And you know, last night when she got the email saying that they couldn't do camp this year and that she now had no job, no plan, you know, it like to see the sort of lower lip tremble, like our
Yeah.
whole family just felt it, right? Like we
Yeah.
just, it's such a loss. And that,
Yeah.
and loss, of course, brings up all the like anger, denial, bargaining, persistent sadness, all these
Yes.
things. Like that's exhausting. Okay, so this is an extremely long-winded way of saying that we're really tired right now, even though we're not like out in the world doing things.
Yes.
I mean, in my family, I know some people are out in the world doing things and they're even more tired, right?
Yes.
But those of us who are sheltering in place and really not leaving our houses, I think a lot of us had the expectation that we would be like, it would be all rest and like feet up and, you know, R&R kind of thing.
Yes.
And it's in fact not that. And so we need to like be really mindful and change our self-care practices. So
Yes.
I am needing, like literally I need more sleep by
Yep.
like an hour.
Yep.
Or I just feel kind of wrecked and I get back to
Yep.
the caffeine. One of my kids is taking naps every afternoon, and she feels really like, gosh, I'm hardly doing anything. Why am I needing a nap? But gosh, going to school on Zoom is exhausting. And how
Yep.
great that she's giving herself a little reset time in the middle of the day.
Yep.
Because she can, you
Yes.
know, like,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
it's
No,
just,
I think you're right on target that it is this kind of emotional toll, and we all have this expectation. We had this one person said, you know, I'm going to learn a whole new language. Like, no, you're going to like take naps. Actually, this is what you're going to do to survive. So thank you. I think you really put it in perspective that for all of us, no matter what circumstances we are, we're dealing with a lot, and that a lot means we need to get sleep, take naps. I know the first beginning of COVID-19, I actually was taking naps myself. But here's the crazy truth. And again, this is that half empty, half glass full. There is an opportunity for us to still try to think about technology-free time and space, because that space away from technology can be really recharging. And so I want to talk a little bit about that idea of creating technology-free time and space and why that's so important, why we want to do that now and after COVID-19. And then last but not least, I want to go to the first point and actually read something from your book because I thought it was so powerful. But tell us more about this idea of creating meal times or other times where we're technology-free, Christine.
Well, you don't want to be on your devices 24/7. We know for like gazillions of reasons it's just not good for you. And there's a real dosage effect with a lot of this screen time. Screen time is not a problem in certain doses, but you do need to give yourself a break. You need to give your brain a break. You need, there are a lot of reasons why, and I find it easier to focus on the actual break and the break activity. So it's by time and space, it's like, of course, mealtime is a good one, right? But it's also guarding the space, right? So for me, for years, I mean, like a really long time, we have not allowed phones in our dining room or our kitchen. And it doesn't mean that the phones never come in to the dining room or the kitchen, especially as we use them more and more for everything, for recipes and all that kind of stuff. But it does mean that when one comes in, like half the family is like, you know what I mean? Like it makes us uncomfortable. And so, there's like, I mean, probably almost every day I ask somebody to step outside the kitchen if they're going to be watching TikTok or whatever, to finish the video. But it creates this sort of relief for us. And I think every single one of my teenagers would tell you it is a relief to be able to count on times and space in the house. We have I don't really enforce this, but we have long discussions about like, why not to bring your phone into the bathroom, right? Like how disgusting on many levels is that, and like sad, right? Like can like going to the restroom be a break every hour or every few hours? Like, can you do that? And so there's like a lot of, so creating, I mean, it sounds sort of funny to talk about, but it's actually a great place to start. Like if you could give yourself a break every time you use the restroom, you don't bring your phone in. People used to like laugh at that suggestion. I mean, like, I've been talking about this for almost a decade or maybe longer than that actually. And people used to be like, that's so gross. I would never bring my phone to the bathroom. Now they're like, oh, but it's such a good time to like catch up on texts. Like, I mean, it's like this normative thing. So anyway, it's a source of a lot of teasing if somebody sees another family member going into the bathroom with a phone. And that's like a healthy thing, healthy teasing. Right? Like
what you're getting at is this interesting point about some patterns you can set as a family, some expectations you can set where, again, back to those words you were using, where we're not compulsive in our use to use that technology, but we're intentional about when we use it. And those patterns we set as a family model to our children that when they go off to college or wherever they're going to go, when they leave our homes, they hopefully will have internalized that concept that this is not something that they have to be compulsive around. They can be intentional around. And there's lots of reasons why this is super important. I want to read something from your book. This time on our call is going to go by way too quickly, but there was something you talked about in your book that's related to point number 1 that I want to talk about. In today's striving culture of overwork, taking a break to stare out the window seems lazy. Sleep seems like a waste of time. Not checking your phone or social media while driving seems boring and unproductive. Despite all this, thriving teens, and I would argue families, are able to take meaningful breaks during the day, over the course of the week, and throughout each season from their devices and online activities. They find time for quiet and rest, often in nature, or a silent practice like yoga or meditation, or an artistic expression or spirituality. They can tolerate stillness and the feelings that come up with it. As a result, they know how they are feeling and what their next best step forward might be. This is what I think you're getting at in a big way. We can distract ourselves with social media and with our phones, et cetera, but downtime, where we're really stepping away from this and letting our minds just daydream, turns out to be really important. And the sad truth is, I got to move us on to the next slide, but there might be one quick thing you want to say about that, and then I want to hear from Patrick.
I think the recipe.
Good.
Go ahead.
No, I over to you, Patrick.
So, Patrick, if you're listening to this, what do you think, Patrick, about all this?
I think the rest piece was underestimated. I know for myself. Didn't realize that going to bed at 1 and 2 a.m. regularly for 20 years, takes a toll on you. And I felt, I think Christine said it about her daughter taking naps. I will be honest, the first couple of days I went to bed at like 9, I felt like I was slouching. I was like, what am I doing? And I was like opening my laptop, and there's nothing to do. There's nothing late. There's nothing on fire. And my wife is like, close your laptop. And it's like, oh, well, you know what? Or midday on Saturday when I'm doing something or someplace else or doing something, and you're like sleepy for real, and you take a nap, and you felt like terrible. But that has been a common occurrence for, I think, most people. But I think to Christine's point, it is so important that this break, I've seen nothing but flowers come from this break. Nothing but flowers come from this break.
Yes. Yeah. It's exactly what you're saying, Patrick. I think it's like we're slowing down and noticing our own rhythm better of what we actually need to pay attention to, and as opposed to being driven by some crazy assumptions about how we were supposed to live our lives and be on that gerbil wheel. So I'm glad you're going to keep us reminding about the flowers you've been seeing, because I think there really are out there. Again, we're going to zip by some information just to keep us on track with time. But one of the other things that Christine talked about is the importance of focus. And I think this is very connected to rest. And again, right now, it's hard. Focus is hard. We've added even more to our plate of school. As Christine talked about, we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty and stress. We don't even know what next week, next month, next fall will bring. But again, we started to see, like Patrick just talked about, hey, how can we set up our day so it works better? Maybe we want to take a nap because it helps us have our focus later. On our last webinar, we talked a lot about how parents can share the load and that can help each parent find more focus. Again, you're right, Christine. This is a challenging one right now. Have you learned anything that's, well, actually, I have a long list of things from your book around how to help us keep our focus. The first is you talk about how we can make technology less stimulating. There's some ways we can set things up so we don't have it bing us and, interrupt us and interrupt our thinking. You can be more intentional around how you use your time. My husband happens to be a really good multitasker, so he's always been good at being able to cook dinner and help the kids with homework, but maybe it's being intentional that multitasking is good sometimes, but not all the time. And you can create more predictable, quiet, uninterrupted time for thinking and learning for our kids is what you talk about in the book, and you have a really good recipe around how to help them create routine study habits that are awesome, that they can start practicing young and hopefully take all the way into college. But it turns out, Christine, that's a really good one for all of us to learn at work too.
Totally. Just giving yourself a study hall, a time to do your deep work. Something that is, I think a lot of people are struggling with focus right now. And one of the reasons why, I'm just going to kind of spell out what's happening to a lot of us is that, focus takes a lot of self-control and it takes a lot of willpower. It can be delightful when you get into a state of flow, but more often it's just a difficult thing, right? Like it takes a lot of intention and a lot of effort to really do that deep dive. It's worth the effort, but nonetheless, it takes a reserve of willpower basically to be able to do it. And the way that we, in our normal lives, pre-global pandemic, could more easily shore up the willpower that we need for really doing very focused, deep work, would be to rely on habits and routines, right? Because every time you make a decision, every time you even a small decision, right? Like what you're going to wear, or whether you're going to eat breakfast before or after your shower, or whatever, those things sort of chip away at your store of willpower. Our willpower really is mostly, for the most part, like a muscle, in that it just fatigues. You can build it, but it also fatigues. And so when this happened, all of our routines were disrupted. Our habits were disrupted. I mean, the first week that I was at home, it was a Thursday, and I was at dinner and I was like, gosh, my teeth sure feel funny. And I realized, with some like humor, like the kids thought it was hysterical, I had not brushed my teeth, right? Like I cannot remember a time in my life when I have not brushed my, it's like, so like there is no routine more firm for me. Like it happens automatically, right? And so suddenly we're having to make all these decisions, like, about how our lives get completely rearranged. I think like in this is happening for our kids too, right? Like so much of their lives is determined by a routine and a structure that is set by school. And so when suddenly they're like, I mean, one of my kids for high school didn't start class until noon, right? Like, I'm like, she's 17, y'all. Like, she will not wake up until 11:30 a.m. if you don't start class until noon. This screws everything up, right? Like, right? Like, so I just think that going easy on ourselves when it comes to focus, like this is not going to be, for most of us, this is not going to be a time of high productivity, because our focus is really compromised. I think also all the Zoom calls and everything, I mean, even if you're not doing it for work, but you're doing it to keep in touch with your parents or your friends or whatever, the thing about Zoom is that, or just video conferencing, it's awesome. I'm so glad we have it. But most of us are noticing that we are more exhausted by it. And one of the reasons why is because it invites multitasking, right? Instead of just like being at lunch with your friend and having to resist your phone. Some people struggle with that already. But now it's like you're sitting in front of a computer and you can see your emails ticking up, and you might just take a quick peek, and then your phone is still there distracting you. And it's kind of a boring part of the meeting, so maybe you'll just turn your camera off and go do, you know what I mean? Like we are multitasking all the time. And even if we're above average multitaskers, there's still a cost to it. Multitasking requires the attentional network in your brain to switch really rapidly back and forth between things it's paying attention to. And that attentional network is a gas guzzler. It literally takes a lot of blood sugar and a lot of oxygen to run it. And so it gets tired. And so then if you're just coming off a Zoom call, and then you need to you need to like write a presentation or do something that requires a lot of focus, that attentional network isn't going to be as good at filtering out distractions. And of course, like I don't, most of us, all of us parents are like, there's a lot of distractions working from home, right? And it's if our natural filter for filtering them out, like noise canceling headphones, it's just not enough, right? Like what might have worked in the office, which putting noise canceling headphones on and putting your head down, now it's like, I mean, it's just infinite. It's infinite, so the number of interruptions.
You're making a really good point again, that during this current moment, it is more challenging. And I love your point again. Let's not be too hard on ourselves. But what I love is that the families we've heard from, and I bet Patrick's going to have some flowers to share with us about this, about where there's been some opportunity here, is that some of the families, again, there's some that are struggling, and some who've kind of created this new habit, and they are starting to figure out this whole idea of like, hey, why don't you focus for a little bit of time and then take a break where you go do something where we go outside and walk in the park or whatever, if they can walk in the park. But in other words, I've seen some families starting to think a little bit outside the box about how to break up the day so that there is that time where they're focusing. And you can look at Christine's book to learn more about this idea of even creating, while they're doing their schoolwork, creating device-free breaks, which I think is a super, really smart idea, and she talks about it in her book. So there's lots of good ideas here about how we can kind of create more focus. What do you think about all this, Patrick? And are you seeing some of this as something you've been experimenting with yourself?
Yeah, I would say, professionally speaking, a lot of the fathers that I work with, and we've been doing this different places, but specifically here in North Carolina, I've got a group of dads I work with every week. And we went from being in a room together to virtual. And one of the biggest things that I felt led to say to them was, there's no pressure to act normal. When this thing first hit, what I've learned working with families and particularly fathers is sometimes they need permission to do something different. And so I wanted to say to them, don't keep driving the same way you have been driving when everything is slowed down. You're going to run into a wall. So giving them permission to do something different. The first thing that happened to me that shifted the way that I've worked, internally, I've prayed all my life. I've never meditated. And in one of my groups, in the beginning of all of this, is probably end of March, one of the guys suggested, hey, before we jump into our program, and we were still meeting in person, it was before they shut everything down, he said, do you mind if we just meditate for a minute? And we did 3 minutes of meditation. Imagine a room full of men, and we are holding hands, and this one guy's just kind of talking us through, just helping us remember positive things, just to kind of pause. And that was the first time I'm 45, I've never meditated in my life. And something happened to me in that 3 minutes. I cannot explain it, except for the fact that I think I've never slowed down like that before, and just give myself a chance to kind of reflect. Prayer is one thing. I always say it's prayer and talking to God. Now I'm understanding meditation is listening to God. And in that space, that happened for me. And fast forward, I came home. I was in Charlotte. I lived in Wake Forest. I told my wife I said, I don't know what happened, but I like it. I like it. And since that time, that was 6 or so weeks ago, every day I have spent in my garage just 10 to 20 minutes of just practicing meditation. I've been reading, Googling, but the thing that's happened is transformative is my kids have seen me doing it, and it's so beautiful. I think I told you this, Jessica, the other day. I went to the garage one morning, Christine, and my kids and I work out in the garage, and I'm getting ready to work out, and they are down there before me, and they're meditating.
Oh my God, I love that. Oh, that's a great flower.
You think about a gift. If we were doing it together at first, you think about a gift that supersedes my time on earth. It's a gift. For them to appreciate slowing down, and that has been a family practice. And every day, it's been interesting just to see us appreciate silence, to appreciate listening to birds, to appreciate hearing the bee that has always been by your tree in the front yard. You just now can hear that he's, and it's been transformative for me. I don't think I'll ever, once things free up, I don't think I'll ever enter a room or space with fathers or families that I do groups with or whatever without just a moment. I may not call it meditation out of respect of religious practices, but I will just ask for a moment for us to just stop and reflect. And I'm just telling you, it is almost like that yellow light. It is so important that we do take those moments. And it just shifted. And I've been, I won't say preaching, but sharing that with men. I do a group. I have a Facebook group that's called Carolina Fathers. And there are 3,700 fathers in that group. In the last 6 weeks, it's grown by 1,000 men in this Facebook group. And I post questions and we do conversations. But lately, we've been getting about 16,000 conversations a week. This is all men.
Wow.
And what I'm finding, and probably confirming to Christine's research, is that people want to still be connected amidst all of this. they still want to be connected. But I've had some guys share vulnerable things, and I made the space safe. It's a special space, just guys in there. But I've made the safe space enough that guys have been admitting to, I lost my job, I'm depressed. What do you do? And to see the number of men say, here's what I did, we're hiring. You know, it's just, I think a flower that I've just appreciated is just seeing, while we're being socially distanced, being socially connected with some of these platforms. So,
yes.
I don't know. I could talk about the transformation so much. It's just, it's powerful.
Yeah.
Powerful.
Yeah, no, that's why I thought we were going to have so much fun, the three of us, because again, each one of you has been doing some real things with your families, with your work, in making these ideas come to life. And that story is just so powerful, because meditation and focus clearly are linked. And it brings us right to that point number 3 about the ultimate point. Ultimately, really what this is about is connection. And yes, technology has allowed us a good enough solution in COVID-19, and we don't want to minimize how important this technology has been to helping us survive right now. So there clearly is something really powerful, but you know, it's not the same as hanging out with people, as being able to be together for important celebrations, as actually being with family and friends. And so, you know, it's been a good enough solution, but when we think about life after COVID-19, we're all longing for more connection. And that's what I think is the opportunity that we're starting to hear in, you know, Patrick's story and Christine's book, that there really is an opportunity for us to think differently going forward about how to create meaningful connection. And, you know, again, all of her books talk about this. The New Adolescent also talks about regular family time, dinners and other rituals. Something shared care families have been doing for a long time is just hanging out with our kids. I used to call myself a slacker family, because we did a whole lot of nothing after school, and either Jeff was in charge of the kids or I was in charge of the kids, and other kids would come and hang out at our house, and I read Christine's book, and it turns out that's exactly what we should have been doing. I didn't have to call myself a slacker family. And that ultimately what I really see, Christine, is that in these ideas, you're helping people learn how to do what kids need, feel like they are seen, safe, and soothed. And I'm going to have you talk a little bit more about that, because ultimately when you do this with our children, help them feel seen, safe, and soothed, what you're learning is you're helping kids deal with discomfort. Life is going to include hard times. And the more we can help our kids understand what they're going through and see that they can make it through, that means that when life throws them another curveball, they'll be ready for it. But also when we are with our kids and we are helping them feel seen, safe, and soothed, it really means we're helping them be able to have more positive experiences. And when we have those positive experiences, we can see our creativity and our intelligence light up. And so really this is about fostering more emotional intelligence with ourselves and our children. And that is a lifetime, you know, gift we're giving our kids. So we're close to the end of our time, and I want to make sure I hear from both Christine and Patrick. But Christine, what would you like to add? This is such an important one about connection.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there's just so much here. I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot that we will take forward from this. I think that people are really learning through its absence, the importance of connection, and that's okay, right? Like, this is very uncomfortable. We are all learning how to deal with the discomfort. I don't think it's going to put a dent in us that we can't recover from, but we're going to have to be really mindful that this is the deprivation of connection that we're experiencing right now is pretty hard on our nervous systems, on our communities. And so looking for ways to reach out in whatever way we can to, you know, and we're so fortunate to have technology. We also can still reach out in our neighborhoods and just be really mindful of our connection to something larger than ourselves. And I think that, to the extent that we can find a connection to anything larger than ourselves, that's good. It could be nature, it could be God, it could be a sense of, like stillness that connects us to the universe, whatever it is, just remembering how important that connection is. The human nervous system doesn't do well when it feels disconnected. I will say that, like, as a parent, the seen, safe, and soothed thing comes from Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson, and I think their books are incredibly good. And they have a new one out called The Power of Showing Up, which is just a great one to sort of touch on this concept right now during this time.
Oh, cool. And who's that again? Just so if people can hear it.
Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson write a lot about that. Great.
Again, really, really powerful information, and absolutely comes loud and clear in your book, The New Adolescence. But Raising Happiness does a really great job of talking about some of these important things as well. I think both really great books for parents trying to think about what to do with their kids. So connection. Clearly, Patrick, you've been fostering a lot of communities that have connection. What have you been learning about connection that you want to take forward as we think about life after COVID-19?
It's a great question. This has been really good, too. It's affirmative in so many ways for me personally. So great to meet you, Christine. This has been really good. On the connection side, after traveling for 20 years and having to feel, at least I felt like I need to be present in all of those situations, meetings, trainings, blah, blah, blah. This last 6 weeks, and I think I shared this with you, Jessica, the work that I do has fourfold, grown in these last 6 weeks. And I always assumed that I had to be on the go to grow. And what I found is that I can be in one spot and it can still bear fruit. And I think for me, for my wife, for my kids, for my colleagues, I don't think, I'm sure I'll still need to travel when everything is safe, but I don't think I'll do what I did the last 20 years like I had before. And I think it's going to be a great reminder for me, but I think my kids are going to appreciate that as well. I'm an active dad. I'm here. We watch, we do stuff, but the way that I've spent time within the last 6 weeks has just been, I don't watch movies. I've never watched movies as a kid, and I found myself watching series with my kids now. And they don't care that I fall asleep. They're just happy I'm on the couch. They're just happy I'm on the couch with them. So I think that connection piece has been really important. The last thing that I would say around the connection piece is just the importance of, while you have time, and this is from my space with fathers, if you've been impacted by somebody, positive or negatively, it's important that you come to grips with that. And so on one hand, I've told guys, particularly if you've been offended by somebody, to take this time to extend forgiveness. Even if you can't talk to them, they've passed on, they're going to heaven. Extend forgiveness. If positively someone has impacted you, I have a favorite uncle who changed my life at 13. I was awkward shaped. I had big teeth, and he's the one that told me, "You're handsome." At 13. He turned 60 3 weeks ago, and I never told him the story. But I called him on his 60th birthday and just randomly talking to my uncle, and I said to him, "While I got you, I want to tell you that you are the reason why I am who I am today." And I told him the story, and he remembered everything that I said, but not knowing the impact of it. So I just encourage folks in this space and time, relatives, friends, mentors, coaches, if you have the time and can still reach them, it is important to tell them thank you, because they may need it now more than you did then.
Oh, wow, Patrick. Oh, what another flower you just gave us. I'm gonna literally sit with my family at dinner tonight with our devices not in the room and think about that exact question about who do we want to say thank you to, and that maybe in the next week there's somebody we can reach out to and say thank you to, because together it's all more possible. I am going to give Christine the next to last word. I knew time was going to fly by. Those of you who can stay on, Patrick can stay on for 5 minutes and answer some questions. But we'll give Christine the next to last word, Patrick the very last word, and then we'll open it up for question and answers. Christine, I'm so glad you're here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This has been really wonderful. My last word is really just take care of yourself, right? Like that. It's all this can be really, really overwhelming, and that's okay, right? Like if you bring your best effort to it, you don't have to worry so much about your kids, right? Like taking care of ourselves, having some positive stress management practices. I'm sure getting a lot of very hilarious memes about day drinking, but I will remind everyone, we do need to, like, that's just a sign that we need positive coping mechanisms, right? Like we're stressed. And I mean, not always, not all the time, but it's okay to not do this thing perfectly. We've never done this before. So so if we can just do one small thing for ourselves, that's probably the best thing that we can do for our kids as well.
Yeah. Okay, good advice. That same old thing, we always put your own oxygen mask on first. The more we can kind of take care of ourselves, the more we can take care of others. Wonderful, Christine. Patrick, I'm so glad you're here, and what gifts you gave us in your reflections today. What would be a last thought you want to share with our audience before we turn off the live part of our webinar and open it up for question and answers? Patrick, any last thoughts?
Last word I would say is to support Christine's comment about take care of yourself. And I would just say, too, I think people are doing the best they can. Everybody, I tell my kids all the time, like, this is new for me, too. So I know typically they look for parents to have the answers, but we're all in the same place. So just continue doing the best you can, be flexible, and enjoy the moments where you can.
Yeah, enjoy those moments when you can, because there really are, for some families, some really amazing moments that we can enjoy right now and then hold on to as some patterns for the future, too. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It was really a wonderful webinar.